So we have Gennaro, who's the founder and CEO of the Genetics Network, and Khayyam from Champagne DAO, here to explain this really important potential of DAOs. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us. Gennaro, pleasure for you to have a seat beside me. We actually we were tied on an email thread together, and we had actually done a presentation before a couple of months. So this is the first time that we actually get to meet after that. So without further ado, 2 words, maybe even one: Pharma DAO.
DAO. That's it. Pharma DAO. And that's been like my best pitch since I've been going to these type of meetings, because typically I'll say pharma, and people look at me kind of dirty. And then I add the word DAO with a little bit of a hesitation, and then they smile. Because anybody who understands what we just went through in the pandemic understands we need ways to find medications we need to save lives. And we've completely left that to the big pharmas to do for us. And that's just the way it is. But I went through that period just like everybody else and realized that there's a better way. And I learned about DAOs about 6 months ago. And I dedicated my good part of my life to figuring out the best use case that I think exists right now for DAOs, which is to generate pharmaceutical products for the people that need them, for a host of different diseases, and somehow reward those that enter into that DAO to not only do good, but potentially get a gain financially as well. And we're working on that right now to try to figure out the best way to do that.
Okay, so you have to help me understand how all of this works. So a pharma DAO, we're making new connections to drug therapies? Or help me understand how this all works, because I can understand how the pharmaceutical side. I understand the DAO side, but mixing the two together, who's running shop? How does this work?
Right. So I've been using a theme here that a good business structure is composed of a grand purpose, in my mind decentralized, something big, not just buying a book or a constitution, but some really big purpose. But link that to centralized, if you will, sub-autonomous groups that can make it happen. And so what is really a DAO, if we think about it? The problem we're having is we want to govern the DAO with 1 million people that are in the DAO, and that's just not feasible. And like we just heard a few minutes ago, you do not want to have 50 DAOs where you participate actively in every DAO you're in, like you never participate in all the stocks you may own. What you need is good governance, limited governance in the DAO. And a DAO represents dollars. Basically, it's a wallet that can be used to drive discoveries, drive the purpose. So in thinking this through, and I'll try to be brief, during the pandemic, our company, Genetic Networks, a very tiny company in a sense, of only a dozen people, rapidly with a proprietary technology discovered 7 drugs for COVID 2 days after the pandemic was announced using this tech. And I've been spending the last 2 years trying to bring those drugs to fruition, one of which rescued mortality in a clinical trial blinded. When I went to Big Pharma, because several of those drugs were generic, there was no interest, and that's okay, because Big Pharma doesn't have an interest in generic drugs. But we need a better way to bring those drugs to be used. So clearly, we need the people to be involved, because pharma's not going to do it. Government's DAO gone bad, very centralized, very bureaucratic. Let's bring it together with a group of people, as many as we could possibly find, to build the necessary resources to bring those drugs to market. And then return, not only are you doing good then, you're finding drugs to prevent your lockdowns and prevent your jobs from being lost, but eventually that token has an opportunity. We have ways now to potentially increase it, but we can't promise that. No DAO can, because then you get into the security problem. So that's what we are thinking about. Now, how do we do that is probably your real question, and it gets technical, but I'll just explain it this way, and I'll give you a direct example of what we did. When the pandemic hit, people were dying straight away. And we looked at what drugs were rescuing people in hospitals, retrospective studies, and we found a drug, a generic drug, that had been reported to reduce mortality by 60%. Our technology was able to, in a sense, functionally code all drugs. We happened to have a functional code for that drug, which we then matched to the over 3,000 compounds we had screened over a decade. And we found 10 drugs that looked promising, 7 of which were shown to have activity against the virus and be anti-inflammatory. This all happened within hours because we had the data. We do our own experimental work to generate that data. We don't rely on outside labs to create data. We do it in-house. And that led to the observation that if we match these codes, we could find drugs for virtually any disease. So with that in mind, we're sitting in a very powerful position to move forward until we ran into the barriers, which were government and pharma. So I take it to you guys, would you like to have a decentralized organization with a massive liquidity pool that could basically create drugs and sell them as a product and get the reward for that? That's all.
The first thing that comes to mind is how come, or who's doing this, or how come the big bosses out there aren't doing this? Because what you just explained is a phenomenal jump in how we get into that treatment. What's stopping them, or is it just the understanding of DAOs? They don't know what that is?
No, because it really depends on having a proprietary technology that allows you to do that faster. And also there's another really big reason. Many of you might know about the pharmaceutical industry a little bit, but I think we're all very much aware that to make a drug, especially a new drug, is extremely hard. And the failure rate for most companies, 90%. So VCs typically invest hundreds of millions of dollars per company, and one might make it to $1 billion output. Then the other 9 fail. That's just a very inefficient model. Now, if you were a VC that invested $200 million in a biotech company with a promising drug, and I went up to you and said, hey, let's decentralize that, what would you say? It's a completely different mindset. So why am I doing this? Why can I do this? Because I never went to VCs. I built my company organically. In my control is 85% with my group. We're all the inventors. We had a very small investment to get started. We grew it through sales. So I'm in a position to decentralize it because I control it. And there's very few companies in biotech that are controlled by the original founder, owner, academic that invented the technology. That's what gives the advantage here, and that's why I'm bringing it to the people of the world, because, you know, I don't need to build a multi-billion-dollar biotech. I need to save lives and heal people with the technology we invented. It originates with the Nobel laureate Lee Hartwell, who's been my mentor for 25 years. This is profoundly interesting science that we've developed over the years that can literally save lives. So that's why we're here. No other reason. And it's going to be 100% decentralized. I want to add one more thing. We're not going to take any tokens up front when we build a DAO. That's not the purpose of a DAO. The DAO should be equal to anybody who's in it. Fair playing field is our utmost, most important thing. We need to be fair when we create this DAO. That's it.
And that's what I was going to ask you, what makes you so special that you can do this? But you gleaned across a little bit of that. What is the background story, or how did this all start? You mentioned your partner, the Nobel laureate. How did that develop? And then, you know, not anyone can just do this. You have the validation, the academic, and like you said, I don't know of many academic CEOs that are in pharma that are doing this. So help me understand a little bit on how all of that started with your partner.
Well, for those that really want to know the details, you can go to my website and get some papers and read them. But Lee Hartwell was very notable in working in something that makes champagne, yeast. And yeast cells are incredibly powerful for studying human biology. And most people don't really appreciate that, but 4 Nobel Prize winners later, we really know that yeast has paved the way to understanding human disease. Lee was committed to that for almost 50, 60 years and won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2001. And it was really largely the work of a group of people, including myself and others, that worked on a cell division cycle. And we figured out how these things work by looking at interactions of genes in cells. That led me to pursue the goal of measuring those interactions. It's kind of like the blockchain in a way, genetic interactions in the cell. So think of us all interacting in this room. I study the proteins that interact in the cell. And that uncovered basically a platform we developed from that, which can literally give a functional code to any gene or any drug. Matching those can be extremely powerful in finding things that could be beneficial in terms of treating disease. So Lee has been in my life for 30 years or so, either directly or indirectly because of his science, and then later as a friend. But he joined me on my efforts to do this about 10 years ago when we got our first data that showed it worked. And it takes a long time to build a story, as you probably all appreciate. So 10 years later, here we are with our story to tell, and opening up. DAOs came into existence, a couple of years ago in some ways. I mean, certainly it's been longer than that, but really starting to hit mainstream. And it's a way that people can actually come together as a group to drive the science. So it's a revolutionary technology, let's call it, but it came from an amazing amount of work from an amazing set of great scientists that have been working on these things for decades. And we refined it, industrialized it, brought it to a company, launched the company, grew it organically, never got a VC. It's been a hard road for me. I'm the sales guy, I'm the founder, I'm the CEO, we're 12 people. And now we're saying, how do we scale this? Give it to a VC, which is the only other way, or give it to a DAO. And that's what we're figuring out.
Yeah, that's an amazing route to go to about it, because when that governance is put into the hands of people rather than a board, it changes direction. There was something you said earlier on, I can't remember when we were talking earlier. Blanked on it. Anyways.
It'll come back.
It'll come back. It happened before too. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious on, it moves into that realm of like data pools. Is that exactly where you're heading, or is it more in matching, precision medicine? Like how does this fit into the nomenclature that we're kind of used to right now?
Yep. Well, I'm going to be really direct about this because I think we're not only starting a pharma DAO, but what we're building is applicable to anybody out there who wants to build a DAO. So I have a couple of ideas, and I'm willing to share them because, hey, we're living in a DAO world, which is like no ego, right? Be open. Let's all make it work. So the current idea is, I think, extremely attractive, that you all know drugs cost a lot of money, and people make a lot of money with drugs. But imagine a scenario where I already have a drug I'm working on right now for the pandemic, for long COVID. And let's say I'm going to get a win from that. I'm going to partner up with a major pharma and sell it for a bunch of money. And imagine if I told you, when I sell it to a big pharma, because I have the patent for it, a huge percentage of that, I'm going to tell them you have to go buy tokens from my DAO and donate it to the Treasury. I mean, any lawyers out there, I'd love to talk to you. Because if that's not I'm not promising anyone in the DAO a return, but if I go ahead and sell it and insist on token purchase back into the Treasury, it might just do something to that token value. So that's we want to reward the people in the DAO, not only because they're doing good, but let's say if we can do that one time, we can do it twice, we can do it 3 times, we can do it 10 times for all the diseases that bother you. Maybe we can go after any disease. Then we need to sustain that, right? We need that DAO to be sustained so we can continue to find the drugs that we need and not completely rely on big pharma to do it, because we know they won't do it unless it makes them $5 billion over a period of time. And it's not their fault. That's just their business model. They've overgrown themselves. They're centralized, and they're huge. They need a lot of money to support their infrastructure. Blockchain has very little infrastructure cost. So come with me, let's do this, and figure out a way to, the governments will say yes, and we'll make a difference in the world. I mean, that's pretty much what I'm working towards. I'm not really interested in making billions of dollars from drugs. That's just not a focus of mine. It's about how do we find the drugs that we need for people so they can heal them, period. And I don't think that's a story I think anybody can embrace.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you're almost creating your own little hedge fund to further the discovery and creation and just efficacy for a lot of the things that are being treated.
Correct. And hedge fund is a good term if you add DAO. Just like pharma is sort of a rough term to hear, and so you hear the word DAO afterwards. I thought about this, and really what you're creating is a wallet or a hedge fund, but it's not my hedge fund. It's your hedge fund. It's the world's hedge fund. In my crazy hypothetical brain, I'm like, why doesn't every person on Earth have a Pharma DAO token? Even if you have $1 and you have 1 token or whatever it is. Because the purpose is to find the drugs we need to heal. That's it. Who doesn't have an interest in that? I'll tell you, all the money we're making in whatever, not anymore, right? But it's going to happen again. But if you get sick, do you care? What are you going to care about? Only about getting better. So there's 7,500 drugs out there that are known to be safe. We've spent trillions of dollars making them. The key element of our technology is that we're able to repurpose drugs to other indications using our coding system. That's powerful, real. It worked for the pandemic. It can work again, but it's not going to make billions of dollars. But I don't think anybody in this room cares if we make millions of dollars. That would be a big, big improvement on the cost of drugs for everyone in this room. That's what we need to do.
Now this sounds like, because we're in the DAO world that works everywhere, this is something that can globally move into every nook and cranny, yeah?
I just heard from someone that there was a talk. I was talking to a Pulitzer Prize winning author in New York Times who was really upset with the lack of, ethics in writing these days, and he wanted to create a company so he could do better stories. And I quickly said, why don't you build a DAO for that? And I guess there was somebody here talking about Truth DAO, which is just that, a journalism DAO, so that I like to read good stories. I don't know about any of you. I really love a good book. Imagine if we could create a treasury that supports good books. And then when they sell those books and it becomes a bestseller, this is like a drug analogy, some of those things come back to support the DAO that got the book published in the first place. So it's really about creating a cycle that's sustainable and gives people what they want. Good books, good films, education for their kids, but you have to have a product that sells. If you don't have revenues, like Mark Cuban would say, but listen to Mark Cuban sometimes, got to have revenue, got to have a product. That's true. And if you can generate that product and recycle back some of the profits to the DAO in some way that's legal, you can have a sustainable DAO and make a lot of good things happen in the world.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I've heard the word impact used quite frequently, and for me, it's moved into something that's a synonym of consequential. Like what you are doing is of great consequence. And I remembered what I forgot earlier. It was that analogy to, you look at these big giants and they seem like castles, right? And you look at how do you take down a castle? And so you just don't bother. But this gentleman is probably the one person sitting at the back of the wall chipping away at one brick. And then once someone sees that innovation or that pioneering, someone else comes in. And the DAOs are very similar to that analogy of if we all take a little chisel and start chiseling away, slowly the structural integrity of that big giant, that castle, comes tumbling down. And so in the VC realm, this is something of a first. So I'm curious to know what the reception has been, because you walk in going, hey, I'm in pharma, DAO. Right. So how's that journey been, and how's it affected the choices that you're making moving forward?
I know everybody out there is going, great, let's disrupt pharma. But that's not the point at all. It really isn't. It's about learning that people as a group are incredibly powerful. Social media made the richest companies in the world. On your backs, let's face it, masses of people providing data generated the richest companies in the world. So that thought of putting it to something important like medication is just obvious. But pharma doesn't have an interest in this. I call up my clients and I ask them what a DAO is, and nobody knows. They don't care. They don't think about blockchain. They don't think about Bitcoin. I mean, some do, a few friends or whatever, but generally speaking, you don't see any biotech people here. You don't see any pharma people here. I was at Davos 2 weeks ago. There was no representation from pharma, and it's the center of the universe of meetings. So they're not going to care, in my opinion. They're not even going to notice until it's like so out of the bag that they'll just go, what happened? This guy just found a generic drug that is a better Alzheimer's treatment than my $50,000 drug. And then it's going to be like, sorry, you know, and okay, I don't think I'll have a target on my back. It's not me, it's you. It's decentralized, 100%. And we have ways to do that. If anybody's interested, I don't think we can cover it in this time, but we have a method to make DAOs that's 100% decentralized, absolutely fair. Our guiding principle here is fairness. And my partner, Peter Gurr, who's helping me build out the structure of the DAO, is one of the most ethical humans I've ever met. And he built it on the premise that I want to be fair. And he has the second largest liquidity pool on Uniswap. Prove his point. We're applying those same principles to Pharma DAO. So please stay tuned, because it's going to happen pretty soon.
Thank you, yeah. So from the sounds of it, it seems like you're quite neutral. So even if pharma did finally pay attention, yeah, you're able to...
They're my clients.
Yeah.
They've put me here. If it wasn't for clients that I have that paid me money for being profitable, I wouldn't be here right now. I wouldn't have discovered the drugs I discovered. So I'm not angry at pharma. Their business model, it works. We can't just complain about pharma all the time. We have to just say, let's do it a different way and make it work ourselves. And that's what I'm here for, to show you that there's a way. Forget pharma. And pharma could actually invest in us down the road, in our DAO, just for PR. Like, hey, look, we're cool guys. You know, we're putting money into the DAO. And guess what? They can't control it, because we're going to have a board that's limited governance. So you cannot try to overrun the DAO if you wanted to. Nobody would do that. It's just silly. But they certainly give money to nonprofits and research just to look good, right? So why not buy some DAO tokens? Or else they'll buy a drug from genetic networks and I'll make them buy Pharma DAO tokens as part of the deal. And that's really, I think, the power that you guys all have. Simple in my mind, but, you know, please.
Yeah, yes. I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit and be, I'm coming to the Pharma DAO, and now you have some of my data. What happens with all that stuff? Because in my experience, people are a little hesitant to offer up that data because they don't know what's going to happen with it. So now we're moving into a phase where we've got transparency, we've got blockchain, we can see all of these things. So how does that relate into this world?
Great question, but there's no data from you. It's yeast data, and yeast doesn't care. So they're really great. Yeast cells have been my friend for 40 years. Amazing organism. They're a single-celled organism. They give us information about our own cells, and they're phenomenal. The data we're talking about, this is a very important point he raises, though, because the data we generate, if we're able to sustain that DAO and the people of the world unite to do that, the data we generate drives good research. That's why I did it initially when I was an academic. When we do a coding of a gene or a drug, we learn about those genes and drugs. Biological information that's incredibly valuable to scientists. Right now, we've been keeping it proprietary because we're a centralized company. But I could be persuaded to let that data come out to the research community, which I've been part of for many years, so that the scientists can now get this amazing database, access to this database through maybe an NFT, and that could bring, again, revenues back to a DAO to support the data creation. So data is a big part of this, but it's not human data. It's yeast data. It's like nobody cares. It's just yeast data on drugs and genes. So that's incredibly valuable. It costs a lot of money to build that, and we're working with government to do these kind of things as well, which is a big DAO, really. Kind of a funny one, but you know, it's a DAO, if you really think about it. And we can generate that data. And there's 7,500 approved medications that we need to screen. There's 21,000 human genes we need to screen. For all those out here that have somebody with a disease somewhere that's rare and nobody cares about and nobody wants to build a drug to, maybe we'll find a generic drug that can match up to your disease in like a week. And we can figure out a way to test that because it's safe and a doctor can off-label prescribe it. And if it happens to work, you're going to be the happiest person in the world and thank the DAO for making it all happen. That's what the goal is.
It's very interesting. You got my head going and thinking about the, we treat people, but in that data exchange, could we treat the genes and then kind of like go the other way? So it's like looking at how that medication reacts with these genes. Like, I'm different than you are. I'm going to react differently to this. Like, is there some kind of
Khayyam really
with
loves
that?
personalized medicine. I'm just going to tell you, he's very excited about the future. He's like 100 years ahead of us. But yes, in principle, that data we're generating provides the foundation to do personalized medicine, because all drugs interact with more than one target in your cell, and how your variants of those genes are determined, right, is through your parents. Will dictate how you respond to that drug, theoretically. By measuring these responses that we do using this proprietary platform, we can get data that would allow us someday to evaluate how well you would actually respond to a given drug. But I'm a scientist, and I have to be honest with everybody, that's a lot of work. What I'm talking about is just getting a baseline of understanding how a drug code matches a disease, and then testing that out to see if it works. And if it does, bring it to market as quickly as possible to save lives. That's number one for me. Number two is personalized medicine, precision medicine. The rest of it will follow because, you know, look how fast things evolve with technology. So I can imagine that happening in another 20, 30 years.
Yeah, no, thank you. I know it just, I mean, it's...
Don't worry.
Yeah,
it's going to be okay.
Okay, it's going to be okay. Thank you. I have hope. It's definitely an interesting area, and it gets my brain going. I'm wondering if there's any questions from the audience. Definitely. I think there's a mic over there. You're open to all of these questions. You're open book.
Absolutely.
There we go. Perfect.
I love
Please, sir.
questions.
Thanks, guys. I like the idea of a medical DAO at a high level. There's one problem I think all DAOs face, and this is an extreme example of it. So if I have, you know, it's March 2020, COVID breaks out, we need some quick turnaround on some, you know, positive results on potential cures. Get results that taking horse tranquilizers and malaria drugs are very promising. I follow the DAO's advice, my relatives die, I need to go sue somebody and hold them accountable, throw them in jail. And now I'm looking at a DAO that's faceless, nameless. There's no accountability. And while I agree the CDC has lost all credibility, I think without a body like that in place of some kind, you really have a big challenge getting people to accept this.
Yeah, so I do have an answer to that question. It's a great question. But I think what you need to understand is that the DAO is not developing the drug, okay? The DAO is just a wallet. There's nothing else. There's no liabilities, it's just a wallet. The liability is on my back, genetic networks. So any biotech company has to go through very strict guidelines to get anything approved for emergency use authorization, just like Gilead did, Pfizer did, et cetera, Merck. So that is all going to happen. You know, I'm a biotech company. I would adhere to those rules. This is a partnership between, as I said earlier, centralized versus decentralized. So what you're doing is you're relying on the centralized entities, and it could be my company or other companies that the DAO wants to engage. But they have to do everything by the book. This is not like the DAO creates a drug and delivers it out to the public. You can't do that. You have to ask for emergency use authorization for those drugs through a company, a real company that's centralized in that space. So in the case of your model of saying a pandemic breaks out, what people didn't realize during the pandemic, and I think if I tell you this, you'll realize it now, we did not die because of a viral infection. I mean, I'm being a little facetious. The immune system in almost everybody here, if you were infected or, you know, hopefully you weren't, but if you were, it took care of the virus. The virus is gone. The problem we were having is we were getting an over-exuberant immune system response that was putting people in hospitals and killing them. The drugs we identified, I made a subtle remark before that I looked for mortality decreases by drugs. I did not look for antivirals. Specifically, I looked for things that saved people's lives. And then it turned out one of the drugs was in our database that led me to the other 10. Now, I knew the mechanism of action, I knew what those drugs were doing, even if they were not the same drug, and it all came to lipid metabolism, and it all came down to inflammation. And now we know, if you read the papers, everybody's talking about inflammation, and that's the reason people died. And 2 years ago, we filed a patent on method of use of all these drugs for that specific reason. We still have to go through and make those drugs available to people through the normal channels worldwide. US is FDA, UK is something else. So that's what we'll do. But that's the company's role. And if we win, if we find something that people can use to save them from the next pandemic, there'll be profit to be made, and we'll force whoever buys that to buy some PharmaDAO tokens. That's it. So the DAO has nothing to do with the drug development or manufacturing or distribution of the medication. They're simply a wallet with really no liability. And we'll ensure there's no liability for the board by putting it in an LLC and just manage the DAO.
Hi, my name is Mike Dragan. I have a background in bioinformatics. I was wondering about the structure that you're planning on setting up. So, for example, there's a DAO. The DAO finances the LLC. The LLC focuses on probably discovering a certain drug to a certain disease or more, whatever. The LLC is developing a cure and patents it. Afterwards, the company is being sold. Who owns the IP? Who distributes the IP?
So the company owns the IP completely, develops the drugs, and the issue here is, do you want to do good? Yes. Do you want a reward of some kind? Yes, maybe. We can't promise a reward because that's a security, so we have to find another way to do that. And the only way that I can think of right now, and I'm open for discussion on this, because I'm open about it. I want to make this work. Because if I was greedy, I would just build the drug and make a lot of money and, you know, sell the company. But if I'm not greedy, I want to share those profits with the DAO. The DAO offers grants. Now, it's like I wouldn't say a non-for-profit because it's not a non-for-profit, but there is a really good analogy for what I'm talking about here. About 15 years ago, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, I know the story very well because I was part of it, basically paid $250 million to Aurora Bioscience and then Vertex to build a drug for cystic fibrosis. It was a non-for-profit giving money as a grant to this for-profit entity. In the end, they had a deal that said they get 10% royalties on all sales of that drug. They made a fatal mistake in that they had no control over the pricing of the drug or in the manufacturing distribution of the drug. The company retained 90%, even though the foundation paid for the entire job, 100%. When all said and done, a cystic fibrosis drug came out costing $300,000 per dose, making billions of dollars for about 1,500 patients. And the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation got $3.5 billion in cash when they sold their 10% royalty stake. Kind of an amazing story. So could you imagine a scenario where Cystic Fibrosis Foundation was a DAO, and they got 10% royalty back, and all of a sudden $3.5 billion. I'm not guaranteeing that, but that's a case study that actually happened, and you can read about it. Go look it up. It was unbelievable. How can a non-for-profit company get $3.5 billion in cash? But they did. And I don't know how clever they were in figuring out how to get that money in without upsetting their status. But this is centralized nonprofits making cash. And the donors got nothing except tax write-off, and they felt good about getting a drug for cystic fibrosis, which is great if that's all they were intended to do. So that's the point. Why are you in the DAO? Because you want to make money, or you want to save lives? I mean, those are the kind of things you have to think about and decide for yourself.
Thank you very much. As a follow-up question, given the fact that the DAO is probably going to be financed via a token issuance, is there any way that you can pack utility within this kind of tokens for those that have financed the creation of the DAO in this system, this pharma DAO system?
So this is where I have to really call out, and he's not here. He was here for a couple of days, but he left this afternoon. Peter Gurr from Wise Token. Shout out for Peter. But Peter has developed, I think, one of the most revolutionary ways to launch a DAO. It's proven, he's done it. And it's done by fair auction. So there's no price put on the token. You tell us the price of the token. And nobody has tokens up front. So if I buy tokens, I buy tokens. If Khayyam buys tokens, he'll buy tokens. But everybody will put in each day for 50 days whatever they want to provide for a 5 million token release. And the price will be set on each 24-hour period. And at the end of the day, we're going to sell 250 million tokens. We're going to raise a lot of capital because he's already proved that that works. And that'll go into Uniswap, decentralized exchange, backed by the Ethereum that's raised for that token auction. So now you have an asset-backed token and a liquidity pool that's massive. And you can stake it, part of it, but part of it we'll use for drug discovery. And so there's two benefits here. It's a sort of a DeFi for what we're not using for drug discovery, but it's a massive pool. When he did this the first time, he raised up to $500 million US equivalent in 50 days. And he was the largest at one point. He's very noble because he says he's the second largest liquidity pool on Uniswap now, but he once was the biggest. And it's an amazing story. And he built it without VCs, organically with his own money. And he has a great development team, and we partnered up. It was about as good a marriage as I've ever had since the one that lasted me 30 years already. And I think we're off to something. So I think we have to change our understanding of how we use tokens. These are governance tokens, they're utility tokens, they're not meant to be traded, to make money. This is about a purpose-driven project that everybody in the world can contribute whatever they can afford to make drugs available for people that need them. It's as simple as that. Don't make it complicated. We auction off the tokens, and then there's a demand for them as we go forward, period. And it's a fixed number. We don't add to them that much. That's it. There is ways that we could add to it. When the buyers of the drugs come in and they buy the PharmaDAO tokens, we have a chance that we can expand the pools as needed, but that'll be governed by the board, which is going to be some really amazing people that are not in it for the money, are in it to do good, like Lee Hartwell, Nobel laureate,
Yeah.
How do we change the world to make it better and have people healed?
Yeah. One moment, I want to jump in. I'm going to butt in. I have two quick questions. So 50 days, I can go in every day and just buy a token whenever you do this auction?
Yeah, so the way that the auction will work, we're probably going to launch early next year. We're hoping to do this just after Davos. The idea is that every single day we'll be on like a YouTube channel telling people what we're doing. But bottom line is we're auctioning off a percentage of the total amount that we will sell every single day as a fair auction. Keyword here, fair. You buy the tokens, you put in the ETH, whatever you want, and at the end of the 24-hour period, if you're really smart and you're a game player, you can do game theory and figure out which is the best day. You can do all those fun things. But basically, at the end, it's a set price for that day. You could average it over 50 days, but he's already done this and proved it out. It works. And at the end, you have your raise, your Ethereum raise. And that all goes on to Uniswap as a liquidity pool, and then we burn the address to that liquidity pool, so no rug pulls possible, done.
Yeah,
the only access is Wise token. In his case, now it'll be the only access is PharmaDAO token to that money. That's it. So, and we have 7,700 people in Wise token, and nobody owns more than 1% of that pool.
Okay, awesome. That helps out a lot. Plus, I might not get all 50. I'm going for an auction.
I hope I did a good job explaining that because Peter's the expert, but thank you.
All right, thank you for your patience.
No, I had just a general question. What's the best form of contact, getting in contact to get in the PharmaDAO?
Me and Peter Gurr, but I'm a point person on this for now. Genetic Networks, I have a website. That's my company. But we're going to be putting up a website pretty soon for PharmaDAO. But please, just reach out to me. I'll be happy to give you all the information you need to make sure you keep in touch with what we're doing. Happy to do that.
Thank you. I don't know what we're doing for time. That thing does not work.
We got 30 minutes as far
We got 30 minutes left. Where do you want us to start? Can I get a time check? What are we at? Oh, we went way over. Well, that's great. I love that.
Nobody complaining yet?
No one's complaining. Well, Gennaro, thank you so very much for enlightening me and everyone else on what PharmaDAO is doing and what the future is and how bright it can look making consequential decisions. So I really appreciate you being here, doing what you do, and being that person with that flag leading us. So thank you again.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. I really appreciate it.